Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Achieving More Together webinar today. We are very excited about our presentation. I'm Sue Parr. I'm President and CEO of the Augusta Metro Chamber of Commerce, and just want to take a moment to thank all of you for joining us today and for your past participation in all of our twice weekly webinars. Today's program is really starting to get a lot of headlines. We are going to be talking today about recovery, about Georgia going back to work. We enjoy a very good partnership with Chris Clark and the team at the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. And we are very delighted today to have Daniela Perry, who is the Vice President for the Georgia Chamber Foundation, with us. And she is in charge of the Georgia Chamber's effort for their Resiliency and Recovery Task Force. And she's going to talk to us a little bit today about what that entails. Our theme today is economic sustainability. We want to make sure that we are engaging every part of Georgia, Augusta included, to help develop those initiatives, policies, things that we need to be thinking about as Georgia begins to re-enter economic recovery and we get out of our economic coma. If you are a new participant to the webinar series, we hold these every Tuesday and Thursday at 3 o'clock. It is part of really our holistic initiative that we launched 8 weeks ago, Achieving More Together Today, with the goal of inspiring our members, educating our members, keeping them informed, keeping them connected. We also send out daily communications, which we hope that you are receiving, as well as all of our social posts to continue to be the resource that our members need for relevant information. This webinar will be recorded and will be sent via email to all those that are registered for the webinar today. It will also be housed on our website. And believe it or not, we have accumulated a library of 16 of these webinars that we're very, very proud of, with well over 100 different speakers, many hundreds and hundreds of participants, and they can be viewed at any time at your leisure, and we hope that you will take advantage of that. If you have questions for Daniela during the webinar, we have a question button that you can hit and just type in your question, and those will be filtered back to me. After Daniela's presentation, and she's going to be sharing her screen, as she already is, to take you through a slide deck that I think is really put together very well to help us understand what this initiative is about. We'll ask her some questions that flow through our participants, or I might have a few questions of my own. So again, Daniela, it's very nice to see you again. Just before we were live on the webinar, we discovered that we actually knew each other back in 2012 during the T-SPLOS days. You've had a lot of hats over the years with the Georgia Chamber, and we are absolutely delighted to have you via virtually in Augusta today. So Daniela, with that, the program is yours.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you so much for your strong leadership in Augusta metro area, as well as across the state. We are so grateful to have you as part of the Georgia Chamber Federation and serving on our Resiliency and Recovery Task Force. So I'll first go over some information about our task force and really what those goals are, and then I'll also share a bit more information about some priorities that Sue has shared that may be helpful. I just want to share a little about myself too. I've been with the Georgia Chamber in a few different capacities, and I've really loved it. Before I was with the Georgia Chamber, I was with U.S. Senator Johnny Isakson, and prior to that, I was with the State Charter Schools Commission of Georgia. I'm a proud double dog with my undergraduate and master's from the University of Georgia, and grew up in Morgan County. So I think, it's an understatement to say that the impact of COVID-19 has been far-reaching and really touched every aspect of our daily lives and our economy. And so much of what we've been doing since, early to mid-March has really been focused on crisis management. And I think that goes with a lot of your businesses, your daily lives, and what y'all been doing here in Augusta. And so, again, the ripple, you look at everything, and, I would love to say that when we launched the New Georgia Economy, series last year, that, we could have foreseen that something like this could have happened, but of course, no one understood, what a pandemic and how pervasive this could be to society. But really, when we thought about the new Georgia economy, it was, what kind of unforeseen disruptions were going to totally transform our daily lives and economy. I think we see, how automation can continue to kind of leverage off of this situation. And so really what we want to do is make sure that we're able to create a resilient and sustainable economy that benefits all Georgians. So I think, clearly stage one has been where we've spent the most of our time thus far, really just responding, making sure that our critical industries have those designations and are able to respond, getting PPE and doing everything, making sure that we're understanding, and responding to the crisis. We're beginning to move into that stage two as many restrictions have been lifted, and we're starting to move into this, new space where we've got lots of guidance to follow and lots of things to keep us safe. And of course, running the Georgia Chamber Foundation, really what we do at the foundation is look at those long-term economic trends, see best practices, what's going on in other states, and all that other information, and look at data to look at the long term. And so when we, kind of mid to end of stage one, we were really thinking about how do we make sure that we're looking beyond the next 3 months, beyond the next 6 months, and how are we thinking about how this is going to, really transform our economy and make lasting impacts that's felt for at least the next couple of years. So Chamber Foundation, we've been, really starting to dig into that work, and of course, still responding to all of those immediate needs, providing resources. If you haven't visited our website, we've got a host of information, always interpreting the new executive orders that are coming, so that you kind of use those to help implement new operational procedures in your business. And of course, we're all, I think, interested to see what stage 3 looks like, but we'll kind of have to wait and see with that one. So with what we've done, I'll talk about the state approach, which is a task force that we're managing, but we've also been working with our local chambers across the state through the Federation, making sure that everyone has resources about kind of how they can continue to start implementing this across the state, so that every community has a really strong strategy for how to think about resiliency and recovery. So Chris Clark and Morgan Law, who I know many of you know, have been managing that with all of our Federation partners across the state, and we're grateful that Sue has been so engaged in that effort. On the national level, we're also part of a coalition with the U.S. Chamber and the Council of State Chambers, developing best practices and also sharing information, because we know so many of our businesses don't operate just here in Georgia, they operate across the nation. And so it's really in our members' best interest to make sure that we are doing everything we can to develop best practices that aren't going to just benefit us here in Georgia, but will benefit businesses across the nation. So we're actively engaged in that effort. And now move on to our state task force. And you'll see the mission here, but it really is, meant to look at all of those policy options, best practices, any kind of business intelligence, emerging trends that we need to really understand and capitalize on, so that we can mitigate any kind of future risk and, limit as much of this negative impact that we're seeing across businesses across our state. And kind of what our state task force is looking at is not just state options. We're looking at everything that could benefit at the local level, state and federal level. Our congressional delegation has been great partners as we've been working with them and sharing so much of what we're hearing from members across the state. And so we're grateful for their partnership as well. This is kind of our task force structure. You'll see that Teresa White from Aflac, Ben Tarbutton from Sandersville Railroad, and Sunny Dariso from Atlantic Capital Bank are our chairs of this group. But you'll also see that we've got, individuals from across the spectrum. We've got manufacturing, we've got fintech, we've got, all kinds of industries, film, as well as all of our affiliates, thinking about transportation, education, and everything that could kind of span that scope. We've got all of our policy committees. We've also got all of our councils, which include HR, marketing, as well as small business, and then our policy committees are healthcare, business climate, and health and wellness, and a whole host of other ones. So we've really tried to think about everyone that could be as part of this. We've also asked some really key leaders within our federation to join this group to make sure that we are hearing from Southwest Georgia, East Georgia, West Georgia, and the northern part of Georgia as well. We want to make sure this is as comprehensive a document that we can share with state leaders as possible. And I think many of you will remember kind of the role that the Georgia Chamber played in the competitiveness initiative coming out of the 2008 recession. And really that's how Chris envisions this is kind of, a multi-year effort where we're making sure we're passing business-friendly legislation that's going to help us in our long-term economic recovery. So we're getting a lot of information from our members and encourage you to share anything that may be beneficial to your business or your neighbor's business with Sue. And of course, I'm obviously happy to reach out to us as too. We're also doing a lot of member surveys and we're doing some polling of registered voters here in Georgia. Deloitte has offered to kind of provide some consultancy report, and then we're kind of doing some of our own research as well. So these are our 5 key areas, and I think we're adding another one too around long-term economic prosperity. But we are really looking at kind of those long-term policy recommendations, best practices, what trends are we seeing in other states, and then we're also looking at kind of what are those things that we need to address in our upcoming legislative session. June 11th is when we know that they'll be back in session, and so we've got a few key issues. I think liability reform is the major that we are thinking about, and we may add a couple onto that, but really we're seeing the potential for so many frivolous lawsuits against businesses that are absolutely trying to implement this myriad of recommendations and best practices from different state and federal entities. And we want to make sure that businesses that are following every bit of guidance, that they are able to make sure that they have the necessary protections to operate their business to support a strong economic opening and recovery in the long term. So this is kind of the overview of our task force, and we're kind of just getting starting our structure. We are also continuing to build out a new series. It'll be roundtables, it'll be industry focused as well. And then we've also been continuing our town halls that have different elected leaders. Today, Jeff Duncan was our speaker, and he did a fantastic job. And I think you can find some of those also on our website if you're interested in listening to some previous ones. So I'll talk a little bit too about some things that Sue and I and your chamber team talked about that may be interesting to you as we move through this. So Morning Consult is a great partner that we use for a lot of polling and information, and they've done a really good job at looking at consumer confidence across the nation and kind of seeing what trends they are. So you'll see these different colors for where Georgia and other states are. Georgia actually is right around 94.7 is the number. So we're almost in that kind of darker category, but you want to kind of be that darker color. That means your consumer confidence is stronger. More individuals are going to be feeling comfortable going out into businesses. And of course, that's really what we're looking for. I think many of us have seen the impact that consumer confidence has in being able to reopen effectively and making sure that you have your customer base that feels comfortable coming into stores, going to different places and engaging in economic activity. I think you'll see that many of the southern states kind of have that stronger confidence, which is a great thing. And you'll see maybe in other parts of the Northeast and Midwest, there's a different response. And I think that certainly you can look to leadership. I think that we've had some great leadership down here in the state, and I think you can see the consumer confidence reflects that. We are kind of on that cusp. So, and before all this economic recovery, the COVID-19 pandemic, we were right around 120, which is, the very, very top end. So this is a report that GMA publishes every day. This was yesterday's, but it, I think is really helpful in understanding kind of where cases are. And two, they have another page as well that looks at kind of ICU bed capacity and really gives you kind of a good idea of where we are in the state. You'll see that really, I think things are, if you look in the kind of the change category, you'll see that a lot of those changes are small. And I think, so Richmond had only 10 additional cases yesterday and no increase in fatalities, which is great. If you look at the, map in the middle, you'll see kind of based on your population, how many people have been, that have had COVID-19. And so you'll see that y'all are truly in that much lighter blue category. And I think, some other areas of the state, I think Columbus is a very similar kind of the percentage of their population that's been affected by this virus. The coast has been able to manage it well. Of course, you'll see that in Southwest Georgia, kind of that cluster around Dougherty County that we've all been hearing so much about is really where you're seeing a large part of the population have been infected. But they publish this every day on GMA's website. I think it's a great resource if you're kind of looking to get more information about what's going on and also kind of seeing how you may fare against some of the other communities. I know people have been talking about Hall County too, and you'll see it as a darker shade, but you can see that they're kind of continuing to lower their new number of cases, which is a great thing. So I think hospitality and tourism is an industry we've all been concerned about, and for good reason. This is the unemployment. This was Explore Georgia, and the Georgia Department of Economic Development published this information. It's a little bit behind, but it was the most up to date that was available. And you'll see kind of the huge increase in new unemployment claims by tourism workers, and I think that's not surprising. But I think we will see too that from early April to mid-April, there was a decrease in new cases, which is a good thing, and I think showing that maybe this is starting to stabilize a little bit. This is travel spending related to March and April. You'll see that travel spending is down $2.14 billion. And that peach line is kind of where we were expecting it to be. And so you'll see the green bars is what is estimated to actually have been spent. So you'll see that considerable difference in where we're projected to be and then where we are at this point. And this is the estimated travel generated state and local tax. So state is on the left and local is on the right. I think again, the 113 million is what we've down, but I think too here on this graph and that previous graph, you can see that it's beginning to flatten a bit. You're not seeing that huge increase that you were seeing. So, that's, I think, a good sign that we're at least stabilizing and not continuing to increase those numbers. And hopefully in the coming weeks, we can put that in a positive direction that's really beneficial. I think education, I know, Sue, sure that was a huge priority for your community, and I think we've all really learned the value of our teachers and educators. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law are all teachers, and I know they've missed being in the classroom with their kids, but Georgia is going to get $411 million through the CARES Act, and that will be funneled from the state to local districts. Local districts can choose to spend that funding in any of these key areas that you see here: at-risk populations, remote learning, school meals. And I know we've had a lot of nonprofits that have really, played a huge role in that school meals category and making sure that kids have food. And that's something that we continue to hear about. Just so many, normal things that you take for granted that a school can kind of be a support system for. And so that's something we're, certainly concerned about. We've been involved with an initiative called the Smart Decisions Coalition that we've led that has a host of K-12 and post-secondary partners, all looking at helping students, families, and educators make better decisions about post-secondary education for students. We feel, increasing your opportunity to go to a technical college, a two-year university, or four-year university will, in the long run, increase kind of what salaries you're able to do and what you're able to provide for your family. And so we want to continue that of students going to technical colleges, getting certificates, getting degrees. But what we're hearing from a lot of our partners around the state is a lot of students are becoming the breadwinners for their families when they can have jobs and their parents have been laid off for work. So that's something that I'm sure many of you are concerned about in the long term of how this impacts students. And of course, we're thinking of those students that are 10th, 11th, 12th grade trying to make those decisions about what kind of post-secondary education to pursue. And of course, we want to make sure they have a really strong foundation in their K-12 system as well. I did want to share this as well. This was on the Department of Education's website and it's also published by the Department of Community Affairs. But this is all the public Wi-Fi spots in the state that you can go. Broadband is a huge issue in my home community and making sure that you have access to it. And so I think this is a great resource. I looked through the Augusta options and most of them are public libraries. And so I think it's a great place if you are looking to get some strong Wi-Fi. Of course, I know a lot of students are sharing their laptops with younger brothers and sisters, and so that's a challenge within itself. But I think this is a great resource the state's put out there to help families figure out kind of some creative solutions to get Wi-Fi when they need to do homework or engage in some kind of educational activity. So I'll pause there. I'm happy to go back through anything that I shared or talk about any other options, but I hope this has been helpful. And, we're really in a stage where we're gathering as much information as possible. Of course, the legislative session is top of mind for us since it's coming up in the next couple of weeks. But, we're really looking at that long-term economic recovery because we know the decisions we make now will have a huge impact on what we're able to do long-term. So we are going to release, a host of recommendations that span every industry and every angle. And so we appreciate your support and anything that we can do for you at the Georgia Chamber. We'd love to be of assistance. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Daniela. While we wait for questions from attendees, I wanted to ask about one of the slides that you presented when you sort of stratified the task force and the various types of industry councils. Healthcare wasn't listed, and that might be on purpose, or maybe I missed it, but obviously our hospital systems have taken some very serious blows during this, not only having to care for all of the people affected by this pandemic, but have had to forego a lot of the services that are more profitable for the past 2 months. We know that FEMA has been able to help support some of those lost revenues, but tell us how the task force is going to look at the healthcare industry in Georgia.
Yeah, Sue, that's a great question. And, I think from our perspective, we do have our health and wellness policy chair and vice chair, as well as the Georgia Hospital Association are engaged in that effort. And I think, we're looking at it too from a rural perspective and then kind of a more metro area perspective. We want to make sure that we're making that distinction because I know, it makes a difference kind of where you're located. But, we've been advocating for as much support from the federal level for our hospitals. We know that there have been so many elective procedures that have been able to be performed because of the crisis. And so when we think about kind of the long-term impact on not being able to perform those elective surgeries, and of course, when people feel comfortable going back, it's a huge difference in kind of how hospitals are able to make their margins and sustain themselves. I know there's been some federal relief that's been passed down thus far. We had a call with Scott Steiner from Phoebe Putney earlier this week and shared that that had been helpful, but certainly not to the extent that it would kind of cover everything that had been lost. And so I know a lot of health systems are probably in that same boat. So we certainly are thinking about everything that's going to be needed for rural hospitals as well as kind of those in more metropolitan areas, especially kind of the Atlanta area, I think is a bit unique compared to a lot of other things in the state. But certainly, a lot of hospitals are now beginning those elective procedures. I think Emory is starting up, and so we're hopeful that people take the necessary precautions, but then also kind of go back into their health systems and are able to start those surgeries that they may have been delayed so far.
So I was listening to the news today, and that's a challenge sometimes, but they estimated that over 60% of the workforce right now is remote working. They're working from home. And that is roughly double what it was before this pandemic. A lot of our small business members, and I asked the question because I was curious to what you're hearing, is that, it's this, for a business owner to have to, there's three things for them to consider. They have to calculate the risk of reintroducing their workforce from remote locations back to an office, but they have to do it in a safe way. They have to keep their customers safe. And of course, they have to manage their revenues if they have furloughed workers, when do I bring those back? You know, a lot of our businesses have invested in their talent of their employees, and it broke a lot of hearts for them to have to furlough some of those employees, and they want to get them back, but they can't get them back until it is safe to do so. So I asked the question because, you know, there's this growing debate and conversation about the unintended consequences of people working remotely. I know that a lot of people have just really gotten used to that. And there's a lot of businesses that are saying, you know, maybe I don't need my office, but that has severe economic consequences. You know, your employees aren't going out to lunch every day. They're not buying gas for their cars. You know, you've got office facilities that might be shuttered because they don't need the brick and mortar anymore. So I know that's a whole bunch of, that's a big bunch of stuff there, but do you have any comments on what you're hearing in that regard?
Yeah, Sue, that's a great question. And, you know, certainly we're seeing a lot of different options. I know that we're going to start moving back into the office on a staggered schedule. And so I think one thing we've been hearing from a lot of our partners is that, you know, we all have to continue to start learning how to live with COVID. I think the idea that, you know, COVID will go away and that we'll just be able to start back again is not kind of our new reality. And so, you know, kind of the huge ask of businesses right now to figure out all of this, especially maybe if you did get some PPP funds or if you have another kind of federal grant that you're trying to manage, it's extensive. And so want to make sure that we are continuing to support businesses in every way that we can. But I think, you know, your point about the unintended consequences is certainly huge. I think when we think about having an office and the ability to connect with your employees, with your customers, I think really is a driver of so many industries. And I know that we've kind of, you know, strive on connection and being able to build relationships. And of course, those relationships are still incredibly valuable now and will continue to be. So I think your point's well taken. I think that we all kind of have to figure out what works in your business. And so when we've had a lot of health experts saying that learn to live with COVID, you kind of just have to see what works for your business and how you begin to start doing those things simultaneously.
Mhm. You know, I think this conversation extends. You know, I think it was just over a year ago the Georgia Chamber launched its new economy initiative, basically telling us that you know the fight for talent, you know the rural versus urban challenges, the small business community and its viability. You know, where is innovation going to drive a new economy, and of course that resiliency that you talk about. I'm fascinated that this is really, you know, a much different conversation a year ago, but really all of those things that were predictions a year ago in terms of, you know, Georgia was really moving into a new economy. You know, different industries. I mean, just look at the film industry and how that took off, and the changes, and of course the competitiveness for talent. So I think it's really interesting that this resiliency task force has really taken on the role of, with all of that data that you had already accumulated, that we were headed in a certain direction, and whether this pandemic will either accelerate that or there will be a tension with that. What's your prediction at this point?
Yeah, you know, I think that there's so much that we're all still kind of trying to figure out. But I think automation is one that we're all really looking at. From everything that we're hearing, it's just going to continue to accelerate that. So we're thinking too, how do you maybe reskill your talent base so that you're still able to keep everyone employed, but they kind of have different levels of expertise. I think that, you know, e-commerce is going to continue to be something that we all see. And I know that y'all talked about that too with your membership, Sue, but it's going to play a huge role. And so I think we all need to think about what are those industries that support kind of some of those emerging trends that we're seeing, and how do we continue to support those with our workforce. And of course, you know, I think training with our technical college partners, as well as, you know, the university system of Georgia is going to be critical as we continue to assess those needs and see where all of those trends are doing. But And that's really our goal too, is to learn more about kind of those emerging trends, what's sticking with businesses and what's not. I think a lot of people have enjoyed telework, and I think a lot of people have really missed being around people. And so I think we're going to continue as we start to reopen, maybe see how these trends shake out and see what sticks and what doesn't. But I think automation is one of those that I think a lot of people may not quite be thinking about how far reaching those effects could be. And I think everyone really should.
Mhm. Well, I think the message right now that, it's not returning to business as usual. It will be different business that we step back into. And I think that our members have definitely learned a lot about, if they can navigate through this, some of those adaptations are really going to serve them well long term. We have a manufacturer that, because of social distancing, they had to break out their certain departments like engineering and research into smaller groups. And they're actually going to keep that because they
Yep.
found that they were getting, they were actually, the people, the talent liked that smaller group environment better, and they were actually able to accomplish more in smaller groups. So it's a little bit more, for the business to manage that. But, overall, I think they're really looking at things that they were forced to do, but now have discovered that, it was probably just an acceleration of where they ultimately might have ended up. So your information on consumer confidence, we had a question about that. So what was the firm that you used?
It is called Morning Consult, and they have been publishing all of this on their website, so I can follow up too with your team, Sue, and kind of share this link. But it's Morning Consult.
And how do they get this? Do they survey? I mean, is it a constant process? Do they have like focus groups? What's their methodology?
Yeah, so it's all survey work, and they've actually been, pulling all of this where they're continually kind of out in the field and looking at this. They've looked at kind of some specific areas too, related to sports venues. So what measures would actually make people feel most comfortable, those kind of sports fans. So this is kind of the overall picture of what consumer confidence looks like, but they've also been kind of doing some industry specific work to see what measures are really helpful. And we've seen a couple other things too about what is most helpful for encouraging consumer confidence. Some other research we've seen is having hand sanitizer visible in your business, having someone doing some kind of cleaning in your business, seeing someone wipe down a pen pad or something like that, as well as having a posted sign saying that this is what we've done, we're complying with all OSHA, CDC regulations, and having those kinds of tools actually make people feel confident that they can go into a store, they know what's happening. So I think we all kind of have to be, to your point, really creative about how we start to think differently, but just using kind of those unwritten rules to communicate with your customer base about how you're doing things different due to the crisis.
So would our members have information? I mean, does Morning, I assume you contract with them. Is that some information that, like you mentioned, the tools, is that on your website?
So I think this is actually on their website, and so I can share that with you. This is something that came through. We're working with them on some survey and polling stuff, but I think this came through their normal website, so I can share that with your team.
Yeah, I think that, anything that can raise consumer confidence and be able to prove that, through information and data is certainly very, very helpful. I mean, we kind of know some of those things intuitively, but it really
Right.
helps to have it coming from, professionals that are researching these kinds of attitudes and perceptions and can provide that guidance. So thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. Any final thoughts? Anything else that you would like to share before we close out the webinar?
No, Sue, just really appreciate your time and your leadership, and any way that the Georgia Chamber can be of assistance, we're happy to do so. So thank you for the invitation to be with you all this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Daniela. We really appreciate the opportunity for you to be here. We mentioned earlier that this will be a recording and that all of the folks that are registered will be getting this recording. So if you missed parts of it, you can listen to it again. Or it will also be posted on our website over the next 24 hours so that you can go in and encourage your friends and your customers and your staff. Again, these are free resources on our website, and you'd be surprised at the depth of topics that we've been able to cover, and I'm sure there's a nugget there for everyone. We want to make sure that we tell you about a little bit about our next webinar. That will be next Tuesday, May 19th at 3 o'clock. You can register at augustametrochamber.com. We have Elliott Davis, which is a large CPA firm here in the Southeast, will be our presenters. They are literally sending us a team of presenters. As if you are a recipient of the PPP loans, you've probably heard about some new guidance that has come out on the forgiveness repayment guidelines for these loans. There has also been some new guidance issued by the IRS on the taxability of, or the deductibility rather, of your expenses associated with these particular funds, loan funds that you received, especially if they're forgiven. So that is a not miss webinar. I know that there's so many things to think about as a business owner, but one of the things, if you have a PPP loan, you really need to tune into this webinar next Tuesday to make sure that you understand all of the implications of being able to access that resource. So with that, Daniela, thank you again for joining us. For those of you that have joined us this afternoon, we appreciate your support. We appreciate your membership within the Augusta Metro Chamber of Commerce, and we wish you a very good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thanks.